Hello and welcome to yet another video on Margin Notes presented by your mentor Vivek. Margin Notes episode 6, commentary not a summary, link in the description. Today's is by Heeki Park, published on Medium in March, and it is a build log rather than a manifesto, a solutions architect writing up an actual prototype. Honestly, including the parts that went sideways. And it gave me a phrase I have been missing. Back in episode 2, I raised an open question that nobody in this genre seems to measure. Everyone agrees the spec should stay true, but does it? He has a name for what actually happens. He calls it Spec-Once development. He borrows a taxonomy and he credits it properly. So let me do the same. It comes from Birgitta Boeckeler and it gives you 3 levels. Spec-first, you write a well-considered specification, then work through it. Spec-anchored, the specification is kept alive after the task is done, and it carries the feature through evolution and maintenance. And spec-as-source, the specification is the source file. The human only edits the spec. The human never touches the code at all. Those are 3 genuinely different commitments, and most arguments about this methodology are actually people at different levels talking past each other. And then he adds the level that is not in the diagram, because it is the one most of us actually live at. He says it is very easy to start by iterating on a single specification and putting together a great design, and equally easy to then go off and implement, leaving that specification in the dust, especially as you get deeper into the project. And he says perhaps that is not even spec first, it is spec-once development. That is the honest name for the thing, and he applies it to himself before applying it to anyone else, which is the only way that kind of observation lands. Now, the part I did not expect, and the reason I would recommend this article even to someone who does not care about methodology. When a long session runs out of room, the conversation gets automatically compacted. He timed it. 3 to 5 minutes at the low end, 10 to 12 minutes at the high end. Read that again. On a bad run, you are sitting there for 10 minutes while the session reorganizes its own memory. That is real time out of your day. It happens in the middle of your flow. And I have not seen a single other article in this genre even mention that it exists. And the model economics, which is the practical version of a question everybody asks. On his plan, heavy use of the largest model ran into usage limits within about 45 minutes to an hour. When he switched to the mid-tier model, he worked for hours without hitting a limit at all. So the real question is not which model is smartest. It is which model you can still be using at 4 in the afternoon. That reframing is worth the read on its own. And it is anecdotal, his word, not mine. So treat it as one person's experience on one plan. Now the disagreement. And it is about the most human passage in the article. He describes his trust growing over time. He started by approving every single action and watching closely. Then he began auto-allowing read-only actions because they seemed harmless. And eventually he found himself auto-allowing writes to code files because he had come to trust the output. That is a completely normal human process, and I have done exactly the same thing. But look at what the trust is built on. Nothing bad has happened yet, and nothing bad yet is absence of evidence, not evidence. And this is precisely where the measured risk lives. On the spec signal side of this channel, we covered a study where the two categories of agent failure growing as a share of the total were constraint violations and inaccurate self-reporting. Now think about what auto-approving does. A constraint violation is the agent doing something it was told not to do, which you would have caught by reading the action you just stopped reading. So the failure mode that is getting more common is the one that this very reasonable habit makes invisible. To his credit, he explicitly has not gone all the way to skipping permissions entirely. That line is the right one, and I would keep it. And one scope note, which he makes himself in his own opening paragraph, rather than burying it. He says he is a solutions architect, that he writes mostly prototypes and small-scale applications, and that he has not deployed large-scale software systems. That framing is generous and it is accurate, and it means his lessons should be read as prototype lessons. Most of them do transfer, but somebody will quote his trust progression as general advice, and it was never offered that way. So, what do you take? First, name your level honestly. Say out loud whether you are spec-first, spec-anchored, or most likely spec-once. You cannot fix a habit you will not name, and his willingness to name his own is the most useful thing in the piece. Second, take his hardest won lesson because it cost him real time. He added the authentication layer at the end of the project and hit a property that can't be changed in place, which meant the entire stack had to be replaced rather than updated. His conclusion is build security in sooner than later, and he says obvious, I know. But it is not obvious in practice, because security is the thing that always feels deferrable. And notice how it connects. On spec signals, we measured that security is the one category where these tools are getting worse rather than better. If it is the weakest category, and it is also the most expensive thing to retrofit, then it belongs in the specification on day one, not as a behavior, but as a boundary. And one small moment I enjoyed too much to leave out. Mid-project, the agent went looking on the web to research a problem and tried to fetch his own previously published blog post. It failed because the platform blocks agents from reading the articles on it. So there is a genuinely odd situation underneath this whole field. A great deal of the best practical writing about these tools sits somewhere the tools themselves cannot read, which is, I suppose, one more argument for a human actually reading it. So here is where I land. This is the most honest build log I have covered, and its lasting contribution is vocabulary. Spec-first, spec-anchored, spec-as-source. That taxonomy is Birgitta Boeckeler's, and it is worth learning. And spec-once, which is his, and which is almost certainly where you are. Name your level. Put security into the specification on day one. And take the compaction and usage numbers seriously, because they are the only ones anybody has published. The full article is by Heeki Park on Medium. The link is in the description. Go and read it. If you found this useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for patient listening, and see you in the next video. Until then, peace out. Then